Hey Buns, today I wanted to finally sit down and try to record my thoughts on the Dawntrail main story quest. Let me say straight away that I did not enjoy the Dawntrail main story quest for the most part. There were a few moments that I liked a lot, but they were few and far between, and for the vast majority of the story quest I was actually suffering. So if you enjoyed it, I think that maybe you shouldn't watch this video. I'm glad you enjoyed it, but I really just want to share my critical opinions, and it might be a lot of critical opinions because I wrote them down and we're looking at 75 pages here, so buckle up. Now, the first thing I want to establish is that story is very important to FFXIV. It is marketed as a story-based game, and new players are expected to go through 300 to 400 hours of story before they even get to the end game experience. And the devs' reluctance to remove that story barrier has been attributed to the value of the story. When asked about letting people skip in the past, Yoshi P has said, "I'm concerned that if the globally acclaimed storyline can be skipped through a function, the value of the FF14 game itself will be diminished." So far, FF14 has continued to grow while keeping the story as its main focus. So, the devs see the main story quest as a core, indivisible component, making FFXIV what it is. Of course, many people engage with FF14 for other reasons, raiding, fishing, screenshots, but the main focus is and always has been story. This approach has been justified because the story has been incredible up to a point, and the story has earned a lot of critical acclaim for various parts of its main story quest and its side stories in the past, which is why when faced with story beats that don't make any sense, I can't just think about it less, or accept it and move on, or stop trying to get in the heads of characters. All this advice was given to me multiple times by many people throughout my play of the Dawntrail story, and while it was often well-intentioned, these comments are unproductive in a literary discussion. I know that for some of y'all, an emotional connection to the story can outweigh its logical coherence, which makes it easier for you to go along for the ride. And that's happened to me sometimes before, not necessarily with FFXIV, but with other forms of media. And I wish I too had been able to overlook its flaws, so I would have had a better time. Lord knows I tried, but I like critically engaging with a story. That's how we're able to have meaningful discussions. Dismissing that felt really limiting. In other cases, some people saying, "Oh, we'll just think about it less," they're doing it to stifle discussion. Like, they just want to ignore valid concerns while also indirectly admitting that it might not always have been well executed if I meant to think about it less. It is okay to like things that others don't, and it's okay to dislike something popular. First, I want to talk about the things that I liked about Dawntrail. Galul Jaja. You have a fun, epic duel with him, which made me wish Dawntrail had more solo battles like that. Dungeon bosses were engaging, and they were a lot more fun than they had been in recent memory, although I think dungeons still have a way to go to be super engaging in general. The trials and raids, too, were very creative, with amazing new mechanics and refreshing use of the arena space. I loved Otis. Otis is a paladin's paladin. He's funny and charming with a great VA.
I'm Sir Otis Bologna, Lord Captain of the Royal Knights of Alexandria.
His compassion for Galulja was really endearing. Galulja, too, little guy, was well written. I enjoyed his dialogue a lot. I thought it was believable and sad when he said things like, "Why didn't you want me?" Or, I don't want this, I don't want to be king. I think Sphene was an interesting villain in concept, even though the execution fell a little short for me. An AI copy of a real person that looks, talks, and acts much like the original in many superficial ways, but not the ones that matter most. A program similar to their queen, but without the compassion, mercy, and empathy she might have once had for those outside her dome. That is terrifying and presents many relevant philosophical questions that I wish had been explored more deeply. Regulators and living memory rather complicate our pre-existing knowledge and lore concerning souls and ether, but I'll address those topics in a separate video. There's just not time today for that, and we're talking about things I liked. So back on topic, I enjoyed Erenville's mom, and I actually cried in this scene where Erenville said goodbye to her. I loved the Graha gondola ride. Kryle's arc, which I will talk about later on, was enjoyable, although it was painfully neglected, and I had an excellent time in Shaloni. The lower stakes cowboy side story was really fun. Building the battering ram, war train, meeting the source trolley guys, that was a treat. Traveling through the world itself is always fun for me, exploring new places, but especially since the graphics update. I was stunned by the beautiful high peaks of Urkopacha, the deep blue forests of Maluk, and likely the best in-room to date. There are times when I look back and, dare I say it, smile. It has been a polarizing expansion to say the least, and while I did enjoy streaming it, it's probably not for the reasons you would want. In Dawntrail, for me, the good moments, as good as they were not frequent or consistent enough to outweigh the aspects that I didn't enjoy, which were overbearing and suffocating to me. And because these slow parts were very, very, very long and often tedious and unfun, I'd rate the main story a 4 out of 10 at best. I honestly think I spent about a month after finishing the story being depressed because I was shocked by how much I did not connect with the story. I've been a big story enjoyer ever since 3.2, and I never felt like my desire to get in the heads of characters to understand them better backfired on me until I played Dawntrail. But when speaking with others, friends and viewers and stuff, it's become apparent that I'm far from the only one who's felt this way. Even the Japanese forums have been ablaze with criticism in the wake of all this. Now, FF14 has had ups and downs before in its story, be it from main story quest or side stories. The lows were generally isolated for the most part, or fixed later on. With Dawntrail, there were days where I got so frustrated with how things were going that I had to just stop after a couple hours, even though I had set the bar on the floor. I really, really enjoyed Aaronville's presence, thank God for him, but most of the time, the team got split up and I would be assigned to the group without him in it, which honestly felt just so cruel and unusual. And while clearer stakes were introduced in the latter half, core narrative problems persisted throughout the entire main story quest that I want to explore here today. I know the devs worked hard on this story, so out of respect for them, I'll try to convey my feelings in the most constructive and honest way that I can. While there are compelling moments that do deserve praise, more often than not, they don't get the chance to shine as they should, being weighed down by poor pacing, questionable writing decisions, and by that I mean the plot undermines itself. There's a lack of VA, there's excessive cutscenes, and convenient plot devices that violated the suspension of disbelief. FFXIV is no stranger to plot convenience, and sometimes does rely on it, but it's never been to this extreme degree, being present at every turn of the main story of Dawntrail. Dawntrail frequently suffers from a lack of consequences, making character development feel unearned, rushed, or non-existent. This issue is compounded by redundant, bland dialogue that makes every character sound like the same character. Wuk Lamat seems to have no limitations that affect her in any meaningful way, and she isn't so much a well-developed character as she is an omnipresent force who smothers the rest of the story, not giving others a chance to breathe. In today's video, I'd like to deep dive into my constructive feedback for Dawntrail. So let's hop to it. Let's start with pacing. Stretches of time where you lose momentum and it drags on and on while you carry out pointless filler quests like talking to 20 researchers in Labyrinthos for an hour or fetching cheese before the Titan trial in Realm Reborn. Little to no combat, boring quest design, and a lack of voice acting resulting in a slog. FF14 has never had enough VA, so these problems aren't exactly new, but in Dawntrail, the lack of VA at extremely pivotal moments made the issue even more glaring. The scene where Zeralja betrays Surrealja and gains access to the Golden City? Not voiced. The scene where Zeralja shows up with a golden alpaca and then lays out his plans for world domination? Not voiced. The scene where Thancred and Urianger are revealed to be in Tyral supporting Kona? Not voiced. These decisions are very hard to understand and made parts of the game feel low budget. There are countless other examples that make you wonder why. Why wasn't this voiced? Speak to 0 out of 3 adventurers became a meme in Dawntrail because it's often tedious, repetitive, and boring dialogue can make it a momentum killer. For example, you arrive at Heritage Found and it's gone through some kind of time warp. You see people with neural links plugged into their brains, and you probably have a million questions about what the hell is going on here. But instead of asking about any of that, you talk to 0 of 3 farmers. One says, "Hi, I'm a farmer. I raise livestock." Another says, "Hi, I'm a farmer. This is our storehouse where we store plants." The work is hard, but I'll not deny I take great satisfaction in what we do. The next one. I tend the fields and keep the soil fertile. This is a lamp, and I fix lamps when they break. Every day is an opportunity to learn and grow. Like, I talked to 3 farmers, and guess what I found out? They're farming. I also felt that I had talked to one farmer because they all sounded like the same person. It was a bland, corporate, inoffensive voice that relays information in a neutral and factual way. I'm going to talk more about character voice later, but I picked this example out of the countless that there are because this was a rare time when the story actually had momentum that made you want to talk to the locals and ask questions like, hey, what's that glowy thing plugged into your brain? Are you trapped in this dome? Do you want out? What year is it? But instead, we have inane discussions about fertile soil and lamps. Like, this is the first, that was the 3rd time we discussed fertile soil in Dawntrail. The 2nd time was in Mamuk with their soil, and the 1st time was in the Hanu village where we inspect the soil fertility. Like, I felt like I was in a social studies textbook most of the time rather than going on an adventure. It was a whole lot of words where basically nothing was said. Talking to 3 locals as an objective doesn't have to be a pace killer. After Tesleen and Shadowbringers transformed, you needed to talk to the locals too. And the first one was sobbing and said, it's just so unfair. Tesleen was always so cheery with the patients, telling them not to be scared, that there wouldn't be any pain. Of all the people in the world to suffer such a fate, you can hear the anger, they're struggling to process it. These are real emotions you can connect with. You empathize, it grips you, like it pulls you into the story. When Alice said, I can't be the shoulder they lean on, not like this. Another villager said, me, I don't have the words. Without a body, we can't even give her a proper burial. And she cared about that sort of thing, about giving people the chance to say their goodbyes. See, that's a new angle on this that you might not have thought of. That's realistic, emotive dialogue, people reacting in human ways or telling you something that you didn't know that helps add to the story's momentum rather than killing it. It's like Dawntrail often went out of its way to kill its own momentum before you got too excited, building you up for the next thing and then slamming you with inertia. Enter Kopacha. The entire zone is building up to Wuk Lamat capturing the alpaca, and then that part happens off screen. Given her portrayal as clumsy and incompetent, I feel like they'd missed an opportunity to have a funny scene or a montage of her trying and failing to capture one. There was a lot of potential for humor throughout this expansion that went untapped. When it's building up to the Giants area and you get to the exit of the zone, you're forced to wait and click on the sparklies 3 times because Wuk has gotten kidnapped in an inconceivably moronic fashion, not just for her, but for all of us who stood around watching this happen, even though you could see the Moblin village entrance. And so it doesn't even make sense that you wouldn't notice her getting hauled off between here and there. It's like we all became Peter Parker in Spider-Man 2 when he lost his powers and just watched crimes getting committed because it wasn't his business anymore.
You could have taken that guy apart.
I missed the part where that's my problem.
Why did we just let her go off on her own for the first time ever when she's so absent-minded and gets distracted and lost all the time? Building up to the City of Gold. And you see the gate in the dungeon and it's incredible. And you're like, oh wow, we finally made it to the gate, awesome. And you get edged right at the end and you're told to go back. You can't go in there yet. Fixing the train to see Erinville's mom and the bunny village, but you can't ride on it yet because you've got to leave the area and come back later. The build up and the excitement of getting to eat a taco that you never get to eat. Also, speaking of weird pacing, in Living Memory, Sphene starts a countdown to murder billions of people across several reflections. And you hear the countdown on the loudspeaker. And then, with zero urgency, you ask 3 villagers for advice on a cool treat. You wear a silly costume and put on a play. You take a quiz on the history of the Malala. I do think that zone had some nice story moments, but we need to acknowledge the bizarre pacing of a genocide countdown ticking down in the background while you go on capybara and gondola rides. You, the player, know this countdown will wait for the plot, but the character's total lack of urgency, given what's happening, felt really odd. I do think the zone would be worse without the slower pace that it had, but maybe that countdown should have started near the end. I don't know. But the first time I got slammed with narrative inertia was during the Tulial tour at the beginning. I think that was when I first realized what I was in for. Wuk Lamat makes you read 8 pillars that give a brief summary of every place and every type of person that Glul Jaja met and every single leg of his journey. After the first 4, I remember thinking, and I think he even said out loud, oh my God, that was only half? It was so boring and dry and so obvious that this is gonna be your journey too. And I'm thinking, all right, well, we're gonna meet the Moblins, the Giants, the Hanu Hanu, the Pelu, and it's all laid out and made clear that this was Glul Jaja's journey to unite Tyrell, the Tulial saga. And then you get your tablets that match the pillars, and Wuk Lamat says, this is the Tulial saga. The king says, yes, my journey through Tyrell. Then you go back to the pillars and check to make sure that it really is. The tablet matches the pillars, which it does, because again, for the 3rd time, this is the journey through Tyrell that Glul Jaja took that you are going through now. Apart from the excessive, redundant exposition, I also felt that this spoiled the element of discovery, because part of the fun in exploring a new place is not knowing what's around the corner. Right from the get-go, they tell you who you will meet, their race, their culture, there's history, what they're like, what area they live in. Hell, they even tell you that Ketenram and Valigarmanda will be relevant. This is an early example of how telling rather than showing can affect the story momentum. For a story advertised as an adventure, eliminating so much uncertainty before we had even set out felt odd. I would rather experience the gradual revelation of the world. Tyrell has always been a mysterious continent too, since the Realm Reborn days. So this hurts even more because of that. Something else introducing inertia is just too many cutscenes. Here, someone described a cutscene that's followed up by another straight away. Then, in the same spot, another one plays. Then you walk 5 feet, and with Wuk Lamat, you talk to 3 more NPCs, which triggers 3 different cutscenes. Then you go back to Kryl, and again, it's another cutscene, making 7 cutscenes in a row with 0 gameplay or fights in between. Another core problem with the pacing of this story is how the initial momentum is set and your implied motivation as the player. In Heaven's Ward, you see dragons attacking Ishgard, and so it's natural and logical that you would want to protect it from Nidhogg, as well as support your friends who've had your back from the very beginning. In Shadowbringers, you see it's permanently daytime, and their world is on the brink of destruction. You want to help all the innocent people from the Sin Eaters and save the First, while also saving your own. In Stormblood's war against Garlemald, you have multiple strong motivations for your involvement: locating Omega to prevent the Empire from finding it, searching for a missing and powerful primal, and freeing your neighbors from occupation by tyrants who previously attempted to conquer you during the events of Realm Reborn. These are safe bets. Most players will agree on these motivations. It's not a hard sell. It's obvious, with the assumption that you're not a chaotic evil person that wants to see the world burn. This is most likely why people felt more engaged with the second half of Dawntrail, when Alexandrian robots attack Tuliolol and Sphene goes into killbot mode. It's much more obvious why you, the player, should care about what's happening. Dawntrail's main plot, the Rite of Succession, treats your support of Wuk Lamat as a matter of course, something that should be as natural to you as protecting Ishgard from Nidhogg. Her claim is the driving factor behind all events in the Rite of Succession, and the story's momentum hinges almost entirely upon it. This is a linear story, and you can't actually make a choice, which means the writers put a lot of pressure on themselves to sell this idea to you of supporting her claim, and yet, bizarrely, they do the opposite. After meeting Wuk Lamat in 655, you can tell Graha you're undecided about supporting her, and he says, I don't blame you. He even suggests you to take your leave if you're not feeling it, so not a lot of confidence here. Erenville says this decision shouldn't be taken lightly and offers you a chance to back out later on, emphasizing that it is a questionable choice. Characters you trust advise caution or support someone else altogether, but the game forces you to support Wuk Lamat. This created a disconnect between my logical reasoning and what's going on in the plot. But based on an early conversation with Glul Jaja, where he acknowledges Wuk Lamat is not fit to rule, and your character can agree, it's safe to say that your intended first impressions are that she is incompetent, immature, naive, and ignorant of her people. That said, she's portrayed not just as someone who's unprepared for the role, but as someone lacking the basic competence expected of an adult, someone who needs to be babysat, with Erenville commenting, "I agreed to serve as a guide, not a nursemaid." He said this immediately after Wuk Lamat got distracted by waterfalls and got stuck in the mud in the short distance between the quest point and the town you are going to. A place she has already been to before, where she then couldn't remember the basic Hanu greeting, even though many of them do live in her city. We're shown that she has a low approval rating because she hasn't accomplished anything of note. She hasn't been traveling much, she barely leaves home, and knows very little about her country. In one instance, when Wuk goes missing, someone asks, "Did she get lost?" But there's only the one road. Erenville, well, I wouldn't put it past her. So the way others talk about her doesn't inspire confidence. It's revealed that some of your trusted allies support Kona, another claimant who brought Aetherites, dirigibles, and trains to Tyrol, who studied in Charlian, and who's dedicated his entire life to improving his country. So discovering there's another viable claimant further weakens your motivation to be there. Wuk is presented as the candidate of peace, and yet Thancred says on behalf of himself and Urianger that their reason to support Kona is in order to preserve peace. So the narrative is at odds with itself, with Wuk's portrayal diminishing her credibility, making it hard to be invested in her success. And yet, we are in a story where my investment in her success is the driving force behind the plot. It's revealed by the current Dawn servant that the reason for the journey is to cultivate a leader rather than choose one. And I think that would make more sense if he had just picked up these people off the street and had to pick one fast. But he is Papa. He raised them all except for one of the claimants. So given her royal upbringing, it seems implausible that she would lack so much basic knowledge. He says she only knows what she's seen in the city, but again, Hanu lived there. A basic greeting would be expected knowledge. She is surprised by the Pelu in town who asks for payment in return for information, but if she knows what's in the city at least, this shouldn't come as a surprise. Her brother also has a lot of experience with the Pelu. When she meets the Moblins, she doesn't know what a potsworn is, but it is common knowledge that Erenville has. This Moblin practice is understood by Rolpley, her Pelu friend in the city, and when we ask Fontaine if he wants to be a potsworn, keep in mind, he had just arrived on the same boat from Eorzea that we were on. He knows what a potsworn is already. He knows more about the Moblins in like a day or two at most than Wuk Lamat has learned in her entire life. I just find it hard to believe. I think they wanted Wuk Lamat to show up and be clueless in every place that we visited to establish a starting point for her growth, but I think that the way they went about it did a disservice to her character, while also undermining the plot. It is just incongruous with common sense and other established facts, which gives me the sense that it is simply incoherent. But we have to go with what we've been given, and we can therefore only assume that she has a total lack of curiosity about her people. She only seems to care now that she has an opportunity to become Dawn servant, and one could argue that she's power hungry because of this, staking her own claim rather than throwing her weight behind her brother, despite both of them essentially wanting the same thing. But of course, based on the story in retrospect, we can reasonably assume that a power-hungry Wuk Lamat isn't the intended takeaway, but that this is a sort of misunderstanding that can arise when character motivations and development are not clearly conveyed. This can lead to unintended interpretations of the character you're trying to write. Gulul Jaja is portrayed as a caring father who wants to cultivate good leaders, and later on, Wuk tells us that her training was relentless, but because this is something we're told and not shown, there's no evidence of her having gone through rigorous training of any kind. The claim is unsubstantiated and it lacks emotional impact. It doesn't add value to the story. And with what was mentioned earlier, it makes everything else all the more confusing and incoherent. A big trope about royalty is that it's a stifling environment to grow up in because of all the rules, the expectation, and training that's pushed upon you. But, and I don't mean this in a mean way, I honestly don't know if Wuk Lamat even went to school. Given her upbringing, it seems unlikely that she wouldn't have learned about her own culture and people beforehand. So the revelation about the journey's purpose felt like a forced plot device to justify Wuk Lamat's apparent unpreparedness for the role and it felt contrived and unconvincing, like the story bending over backwards to accommodate a predetermined outcome without supporting it with believable character growth. Felt like the writers were saying, yes, she's not fit to rule, we've shown you that, so I know this doesn't make sense right now, but hang in there. And yet it never made sense later on either, often making even less sense. I'd prefer to be shown why I should hang in there, rather than told, though of course sometimes this is unavoidable. Also, in terms of pacing, by stating that he won't give up the throne if there's no suitable leader by the end, yes, it is wise and in character for him, but it dissipates narrative tension and removes a sense of urgency from the journey that this all hinges around. The rite of succession is framed as an opportunity to cultivate a leader, yet he doesn't want to give up power unless an ideal leader emerges, which implies a lack of faith in the process. This contradiction made it feel like a charade that might even be pointless. By providing an easy out for the king, it lowered the stakes. Now, you don't need high stakes for a good story, but you do need clear stakes, and this undermined the clarity of those stakes. So, we haven't even started talking about Wuk Lamat as a character, and before I continue further, I need to clarify something. For those of you who might be thinking, damn, Zep, you're talking a lot about Wuk Lamat. Yes, I am, and will continue to do so for a bit. Unfortunately, I have to do this to be fair with my criticisms and to include as much as possible. Wuk Lamat is featured an unnatural amount in the story, so because of that, I have to do the same. It just happens that she's present in or involved with the vast majority of situations in Dawntrail from beginning to end. Like, I wish I didn't have to talk so much about her, but I cannot avoid it because she's tied to every single part of the entire story. Bluntly, Wuk Lamat isn't real. No one is, but I cannot feel strong emotions toward her besides maybe fatigue, because I simply do not see her as a fleshed out character in the world. Wuk feels like several early drafts in one where a few superficial traits were decided on, like tacos, alpacas, motion sickness, but not fully developed or supported by meaningful backstory that would give her the necessary depth and complexity to make her a believable person. In 6.5, she'd just gotten off a really long boat ride to Charlian, but she doesn't show any signs of seasickness, nor does she mention that long boat ride being difficult. We take another boat to the hunt location, and she comments, "So we have to take a ship? Ugh, and I've barely set foot on dry land," which sounds more like being annoyed about having to be on a ship again, which is understandable. She had been on one for days prior. This is confirmed by the fact that we arrive and she's chipper and unbothered, ready to hunt and wanting to eat bears. We get off that boat after the hunt, and again, she's not seasick. In fact, she's hungry. Another issue is her pointing out the icy landscape and saying it rivals Yoctoral, but we know that the only ice that exists in Yoctoral is in the mountains of Urkopacha, and she has never been there before. She also says there's rumors the contest will involve Valagarmanda, but at this point, there is no conceivable way anyone could know that Bakuljaja would unleash the monster. Another kind of a nitpick would be that she says she's terrified of heights. When we ride on a dirigible, she says she's never been good with heights, but we did ride over massively high chasms in 655 on the zip line, and she stands on the very edge of the highest point in the city in one of her speeches. You know, look, when things like this happen, maybe that last thing is kind of minor, but the character loses a sense of continuity and consistency that would have maybe made her a little more believable. I want to care about Wuk Lamat, and I like the potential role that I imagined she would have, but she's little more than a tool that was far too heavily leaned on to clumsily push quest progression forward. Ultimately, only one thing defines Wuk Lamat, and it's what she's told you in 655. Papa needs a successor to preserve his legacy of peace. My father's getting old. He wishes to relinquish the throne to a worthy successor, one who can preserve his legacy. Everything my father's done to give us peace, he would drag us back into war. No matter what, I must win. This is it. She represents her father's peace. Wuk Lamat will preserve the peace. It is her one motivation. It is her identity, preserving her father's legacy of peace. It doesn't feel backed by by a personal understanding of what the legacy means to her, or how life led her to embrace that as her goal. If she loves peace because Zoralja threatens it, doesn't tell us why peace matters to her personally. It's circular reasoning. It's like, I want peace because peace is good. Well, we're not getting anywhere. Like, why is she dedicated to keeping the peace beyond its inherent value? Her supporters say they support her because she will preserve the peace. Galul Jaja Bil. When talking about herself, trying to relate to Mabalu, she says she will preserve Tural's peace. A noble goal, which on its own doesn't constitute a well-rounded personality. It's repetition without depth. I mentioned that Wuk Lamat is shown to be ignorant, which is a flaw. And as a person with flaws, she is not a Mary Sue. However, much like a Mary Sue, Wuk Lamat's flaws are not story relevant. Wuk Lamat admits that she's lived a sheltered life, and she acknowledges that she has been ignorant. But what do these flaws reveal about her? Why is she sheltered? Why is she ignorant? Who has she been, and who will she become? Is she a sheltered and out-of-touch princess? Did she not care to learn about the commoners? No, because we're also told that she loves talking to people and is seen as approachable. Well, now we have a problem of she talks to everyone in the city, but she doesn't learn anything from them, which is a self-contradiction. Why was she convinced she understood Tural? Was she arrogant? That would have been interesting. Did she treat everyone the same? Did she offend people in the past and is now realizing her harmful assumptions and generalizations she made? No, these flaws had potential to make her more real, but they weren't integrated into her development. They're just superficial. They don't cause her to make critical mistakes. They don't stop or impede her in completing any of the rites, so they just feel tacked on and extraneous. I should note that in her Dawn Servant speech, she thanks the Yakhui of Kazumauka for teaching her about their culture, but the Yakhui live in Urkapacha. I assume this is a typo and not evidence of her unaddressed flaw, but the fact that such a serious error made it into release is a cause for concern. I do hope that they will do more thorough checks of the script in the future. But moving on. Wuk Lamat has bad things happen to her, and as a person who faces hardship, she's not a Mary Sue, however. Much like a Mary Sue, the hardships she faces is unrelated to her flaws. Problems solve themselves for her in ways that defy reason. Rather than presenting her with challenges that would allow her to grow and evolve, the plot would often bend over backwards to accommodate Wuk Lamat as she is. That is, the world stopped working in logical ways in order to convince the player that Wuk has the key character traits needed to be an effective leader from the start, even when this defies logical sense. For example, we learned from that Galul Jaja got the Moblins to stop doing slavery by telling them that happy workers do a better job than sad slaves. It's because he spoke to them about happiness that he achieved this, and Wuk Lamat also likes talking to people about happiness, so you're meant to see her potential as a ruler. But this story isn't believable at all. Asking nicely to stop kidnapping and enslaving people isn't enough. Why would it be? Oversimplifications like this make the world seem less real, and it just feels a little insensitive. When the Hanu are starving and their crops are dead, Wuk says, the people are sad, but during the festival, they were happy, so we should have the festival because it made them happy before. And everyone says, but Wuk, what does that have to do with the crops? And no one knows. But as luck would have it, the festival boat is a magical focus that makes the crops grow, which the villagers themselves forgot about. And we don't find out why they forgot either. We're informed that the boat makes food grow by a historian living nearby who's been watching the Vanu starve, and he just didn't tell them about it. Before you ask why, it's not because he's selfish or evil or apathetic. He just doesn't have a reason. There's no reason it isn't addressed. That is because he's a plot device masquerading as a character. He doesn't have an inner world or depth or agency. He just exists to deliver exposition that, hey, the boat is magic for food. Later on, their leader, who asked for help to begin with, does remember mentioning the boat worked well to achieve similarly impressive results when she was a child. Prior to this moment, I guess she forgot. This was a very contrived way to ensure Wuk Lamat could win just by caring about people's happiness. You're encouraged to believe that this trait shows her leadership potential, the solution magically appears to fit her seemingly unrelated suggestion, and it just makes the story seem engineered to validate her idea rather than unfolding naturally. This isn't how the world works. This isn't Wuk meeting a challenge. This is the challenge meeting Wuk. If people are hungry, your first priority as a leader should be about feeding them before throwing a party. Even if that party ended up working out, it doesn't make me less concerned about her decision-making skills or sense of responsibility. But the right is not about her learning about herself or what kind of a leader she wants to be. It's us learning her approach is the correct one. So if Wuk Lamat's flaws aren't explored and the world accommodates her as she is, what is she doing in the story? I believe the intent is to present affirmation as a sustaining force behind Wuk Lamat's resolve. With resolve in this context, meaning how hard she believes in peace and happiness after getting all that affirmation. Just after meeting the High Luminary, we have a cutscene that feels simplistic to the point of patronizing. I've heard it compared to Blue's Clues or Dora the Explorer, so I think it's worth going through it. Wuk Lamat reads the engraving, Galul Jaja, master of resolve and reason, champion of peace. 3 things. She repeats it. Master of resolve and reason, champion of peace. Zeralja says he carved a path with martial skill. Kona says he was clever in trapping Valagarmanda. Wuk Lamat says martial skill and clever thinking. Well, I can't compete with Zeralja, who mastered the head of resolve techniques. I don't have the knowledge of Kona, who's most like the head of reason. What is it that I got from Papa? Something I do better than the others. And she's really got to think about this. She asks you, and you can be like me and say, I don't know. What else defines your father aside from strength and knowledge? You know, I wanted to let her work it out. And she says, what else defines him? Of course, Papa's love for peace, for his people. That's what he's given me. And now I'm fighting to preserve the peaceful Tyrol he's built. Again, the same thing she told you when you met her in 6.55. This is the one and only thing that defines her as an entity. No, she also seemed very confident on this point back then, which makes this revelation feel meaningless. Repeating what we already know doesn't add depth. It's not a realization. It's not a believable way for a character to behave. After defeating Valagarmanda, she appears to be deep in thought. Troubled, unresponsive. She visits you in the middle of the night and she's like, we need to talk. It's really important. She's like, we need to take a walk. I was so worried. I'm thinking, oh my God, what is going on? Well, it turns out that what Wuk Lamat needs is more affirmation of who she is now and who she's been this whole time. We meet an old woman who gets us started saying, you're the claimant with the greatest love for peace. She then reminds you of that scene I just mentioned. And Wuk Lamat, then we get to the top of this thing, and Wuk Lamat says, do you remember what I said at the top of Warkor Zormor? That I would fight to preserve Papa's peaceful Tyrol? Well, I've been thinking about a lot since then, what peace really means, if it's just the absence of war. And here we go, the revelation that kept her up all night, that had her wake me up in the middle of the night to talk about it. I realized nothing gives me greater joy than the happiness of others. Life has its ups and downs, but the company of family and friends and the music of their laughter is what makes life worth living. If my sister did this to me, someone I love with my whole heart, who I would take a bullet for any day of the week, without a second thought, if she woke me up in the dead of night to tell me we need to talk, it's important. She took me to the very top of a hill and waited till 5 o'clock in the morning to be like, hey, what I need to tell you is that I love peace and happiness. I'd strangle her. This is not how people act. She feels like a mascot or a cardboard cutout. I expected to enjoy her, but I found it completely impossible to relate to her in a human way. She says, when I become Dawn Servant, I'll build on Papa's peace. Our people will live together in happiness. If it wasn't for you all listening and feeling and thinking along with me, I would have never learned so much in so short a time. I found this unconvincing. She loved peace before. She loves it now, and she'll keep loving it later on. Like, I cannot call that growth. Not long after this scene, the newfound confidence from heavy affirmations allows Wuk Lamat to easily overpower Bakul Jaja and his cronies alone. And in the battle, her big realizations are, what do you think? I must carry on Papa's legacy, his love for our people. I'll protect my people's happiness. Same things she always says, but once more, with feeling. She hasn't changed at all, besides clear, inexplicable power gains. When character development is primarily framed as a realization of inherent strength, it feels superficial and unearned. It lacks substance as a journey. A journey implies that point A and point B are different. I've heard people try to argue that Wuk Lamat doesn't suffer any losses, but I disagree. She does. But they're quickly glossed over. They're handled in abrupt, shallow ways that advance the plot without deepening her character. For example, her city is attacked and many people are killed. She says she failed in her duty to protect and that she feels shame and regret, a loss. I saw a cutscene where she's trying to help a citizen and she's looking up at warships in the sky and she says she can't reason with Sir Alja, so to protect the peace, she's got to fight. So this conversation was had, but it did not impact me emotionally because the writing didn't set it up properly. Telling, not showing her shame and regret is a missed opportunity. Remember Lena, who also felt that she had failed in her duty in the aftermath of an attack? She gave her report, she tried to keep doing her job, but she stumbled and she fell from her injury. And her powerlessness in that moment is what made her real.
Hale and hearty and still alive to mourn those who are not, who I failed to protect when they needed me most. We've come so far, so goddamn far! I could have sworn the end was in sight, and now they will never see it.
Her coming to terms with her own limitations, that made the attack feel real also. But after the attack, Wuk Lamat says, like our father before us, we will lead with resolve and reason to restore peace to our nation. She says, Tuliala will not fall, will prevail, and peace and happiness will be ours again. What we hear is more of the same. I'm not convinced that growth has occurred in any meaningful way. Wuk Lamat suffers from adversity. She watched her dad get murdered, and she wants to kill her own brother as a result. She tells little Galulja that after the attack, I was filled with rage. I told myself over and over that he's no brother of mine, but we don't see that. We're told. It happens off screen, so it's empty. It's forgettable. It's a wasted opportunity to see Wuk go ballistic with a warrior rage because she felt betrayed and her whole entire world just got turned upside down. And no, one small scene as her father dies isn't enough. Dawntrail was slow to resolve pointless problems and very quick to move past the big things that mattered, tying things up in neat little bows and marching on when what we really needed to see was the characters stumble and fall and struggle to pick themselves back up, so we can root for them when they do. Did she re-examine her peaceful worldview, learning about the necessity of war, a war carried out in self-defense? Yes, but I didn't care. It's because of the writing. Did she learn that she wanted people to be happy, as Sphene did? Doesn't always lead to good outcomes. Or did she simply act because killing people is bad? You could very charitably infer that she has come to understand these nuances based on her determination to kill Zeralja and fight Sphene. But for me, that veers dangerously into using an imaginative headcanon to make a character more well-rounded than they are written. The fact is, these dilemmas are not confronted in meaningful ways that would be memorable. So there are missed opportunities to flesh out Wuk as a character. Frankly, by the time events are happening that might challenge Wuk to grow or change in meaningful ways, she's already taken up so much screen time at that point that many people, myself included, had lost interest in her journey. And at that point, it was time for Erenville, Kefkiwa, Kryl and her parents, Sphene, Otis, and Galulja, to get their space to breathe and have their stories told. Which leads us into the most obvious problem with how Wuk Lamat was used in the story. She far surpasses every other character, both in number of words spoken and the number of times you need to speak with her as an objective. It is to a degree that is simply unacceptable. I myself felt highly fatigued. Although I enjoyed her presence for the first couple zones, over time I felt smothered. A person I utterly failed to connect with, who seemed ever-present and unchanging, a fact of life, a condition, a background, a foreground. Every quest led back to her and every character sounded like her. When I closed my eyes, I could see her face. I'm serious. I escaped her in Zone 4. She became Dawn Servant and I thought I was free, but what a fool I was. Time to speak with Wuk Lamat again. It's time to, we had the story being excellent, and it's time to speak. Melodrama aside, she was clingy, for lack of a better term. The way I would write a clingy friend type character, if that is what I was going for, on purpose. There was a time I was with a new character, Otis, and I'm enjoying this guy. And a precious brief moment away from her, she shows up and interrupts to say, "Hey, this looks like fun. Can I join in?" Aaronville has a sad moment with his mom. She interrupts to say, "Looks like we're having fun." When Kona asks for a moment in private, she interrupts to invite herself along. Of course, there is also the last boss. Some of the most fun I had in the whole expansion. A boss who calls you the most dangerous threat to her plans. The boss even traps your companions, including Wuk Lamat, and teleports them away rather than killing them for some reason. So it feels like your time to shine. But as Graha and Kryl are teleported away instantly, for some reason Wuk Lamat isn't until several seconds later, as if we have to see her reaction to what is happening, but not the characters we really wanted and missed. But at about 35% of the boss's HP, Wuk Lamat actually tears through reality to interrupt the fight and take center stage once again. I actually laughed my ass off when this happened because I could not fathom the absurdity of this decision. The plot puts so much unnecessary attention on Wuk Lamat that she became a lightning rod for player dissatisfaction with the story. I cannot believe this. I cannot believe this shit. Fatigue is one thing, but players spent so much time with her that some think she's solely to blame if they didn't like it. But I maintain that the critical flaws of Dawntrail cannot be attributed to her actual character or actions alone, because she's 1,000 miles wide and 1 inch deep. There's nothing wrong with her love of peace and happiness, her earnest take on life, her sunny disposition. These are excellent starting points for a lovable character with orange cat energy that I was excited to travel with, but they remain starting points throughout. The laws of reality cater to her whims, undermining the integrity of the universe we're in and diminishing other characters who must operate within these skewed parameters. Speaking of people who have been done dirty, step aside. Kryl is the reigning champion of being sidelined, and it is something the character Kryl is vocally self-conscious about, making her treatment in Dawntrail feel almost cruel. Kryl was assumed to be a starring character for this expansion. She got a new design and became a Pictomancer too, but with so much focus on Wuk Lamat, Kryl got tacked on to the end of zones, allowed to maybe ask one little question like, "Oh, excuse me, can you tell me about my earring?" Like, the process of her seeking and finding answers happens almost entirely off screen, and she tells you about it after the fact. Very quickly with it, well, enough about me. She was relentlessly sidelined to the point that it felt like she only came with us to fill the trust spot at times. In the final zone, they wrapped up her story really quick in what felt like 10 minutes. But even the scene with her parents involved Wuk Lamat in ways that was forced. Kryl's parents came from Alexandria to hand her over. Nobody has a bigger connection to living memory than her. Can you imagine how she must have felt to discover she's a double-only survivor? From the Isle of Val and now the Malala, you must imagine, because we never got a chance to explore those questions. What have we seen of Kryl's emotional journey? We missed the entire path that led to her resolution. Aaronville too, though he was with us throughout and was one of the most relatable and consistently written characters throughout the expansion, still felt like he could have gotten a lot more focus, and I'm not just saying that because I'm obsessed with Aaronville. Along with Kryl, I will say I shed tears during his goodbye with his mom. I thought it was beautiful and sad. This was not a vacation for him. For Kona, I believe that they wanted to portray Kona as a character who's obsessed with technology and disrespects culture in the process, making him a less desirable candidate than Wuk Lamat. But this isn't supported by the narrative. The Hetzaru people in Shaloni say they're happy to use Kona's Etherites and don't reject outside influences. In the Feet of Reeds, Kona devises a practical solution for their ailing crops, saying they need to embrace foreign knowledge because it can make light work of arduous labor. So there's no need to lug around heavy floats. And to be clear, he isn't saying, don't have your festival, it's stupid. He's saying you don't need the boat to grow food. How can this be disrespecting their culture if none of the villagers remembered the boat's function for growing food before this? Kona's solution provides a reliable way to grow food when they're too weak to hold a festival or carry a heavy float. It's not a replacement forced upon them, but it's a life-saving option. If he had said, here's some Archon loaves, forget your reeds, I'd get it. But that's not what happened. It's bland dialogue, making designated good guys say only mild, safe things. Bad guys are over-the-top evil until they're not suddenly. There's a lack of nuance that would have been necessary. If you want to portray things like Kona's Sharlayan superiority complex while also getting across that he's a kind, thoughtful person, or Bakulja bluff and bluster while also getting across a quiet desperation to succeed, that requires some nuance in the writing that wasn't present in Dawntrail. I'd argue that Kona's curiosity about people he meets is better proof of respect than Wuk Lamat's ignorance and good intentions. She didn't try to educate herself on new cultures she expected to meet next, even after admitting that her ignorance was a problem. After Worker Zormor, Kona asks if the location holds special meaning for the Yakui, demonstrating an interest in their culture. In the Feet of Repast, he thoughtfully listens to the history lesson from Wuk Evu and asks relevant questions. So this idea that Kona despises tradition as outdated and unnecessary isn't convincing. It's something we're told and not shown. A Hetsaru kid says that Kona values technological advancement and efficiency to the detriment of all else, but Erenville is quick to rebuff him, saying he's not that bad and it's rumors. When he apologizes in his acceptance speech for failing to understand what he was too eager to cast aside, I felt frustrated because, to me, he was apologizing for stuff he didn't do. I was unconvinced. It says my own journey has taught me that culture isn't a hindrance to progress, but a shared value that binds us, connecting lives and generations. It felt as though the writers were going out of their way to ensure Wuk Lamat got the glory and the praise. But by the way, who talks like this? It's the same bland corporate voice that everybody speaks in that's just so pretentious and preachy. People were shrugging and shaking their heads when he mentioned all of his amazing achievements and stuff, and they only cared when he said he wants to make them smile like his sister. And I found this really off-putting and minimizing. But also I'm expected to believe that regular people aren't impressed by trains, aetherites, and dirigibles, but only smiles? I honestly felt that Kona had been disrespected and often mistreated in the writing, like when he was mocked for being worried about his sister, when he wasn't even asked first if he wanted to become Dawn's servant before seeing it engraved on a statue in front of everyone, the way he denounced the tools of war and said that he planned to use technology to safeguard Tyrell's peace through deterrence, just like Sharlayan did versus Garlemald. That is a realistic plan to keep the peace, yet for some reason he's not the one who really loves peace, according to every character. As a proponent of better living through Sharlayan technology, Kona had the most validating experience of his journey in Mamuk, which was a huge success where Sharlayan technology transformed a culture for the better. This is what he believed in the most, and the reason he felt fit to lead. But affirmation only strengthens resolve for Wuk Lamat in this story. Immediately after, he forfeits his claim because Wuk Lamat is being nice. And that might sound like an oversimplification, but I'm afraid that's really all there is to it. He says, compassion, even for the likes of him. Then the choice is simple. The scene ends, and he surrenders the throne 2 minutes later. And with the wording, it implies that he had been thinking about surrendering the throne the entire time as well. But there's no good reason for this. We just had a situation where you solved their food crisis with Sharlayan research. And this is the moment you're going to choose to back out. This is the moment that you think that you can't be a good claimant. That makes zero sense based on everything we know about you to this point. The writers never bothered to show his inner thoughts in any substantial or meaningful way beyond, I care about my sister. He never shows up in Shaloni, even though he grew up there as a nomad. He doesn't and can't visit Alexandra, even though he is our tech nerd. Like Kryl, Kona's potential arc is overshadowed by the need to elevate Wuk Lamat and give her center stage at all times. He's underutilized, and so are Urianger and Thancred by extension, who just follow along and supporting Wuk Lamat after his surrender. I kept thinking to myself, why am I not helping Kona instead? Y'shtola and Graha arrive later on, and I was overjoyed to see them, but Y'shtola didn't do much beyond guarding the portal. Finding pathways to other reflections has been her primary field of study since leaving Runar in Shadowbringers, so I was a little disappointed that we didn't see her scholarly enthusiasm about what it all represents. There just wasn't time for that. But Bakul Jaja has an abrupt change of heart immediately after his battle with Wuk, which feels like it came out of nowhere. His tragic backstory and full character transformation are squeezed into one singular cutscene, where he goes from being an unrepentant cretin who unleashed Velagamanda on purpose, tried to kill Wuk Lamat, stole her right of succession cube, and kidnapped her elector dad, to saying things like, "That remains to be seen. Speak with the third promise. Share with her your worries and your pain. And together, we may find a new way forward," or "We can't change the past, but we can try to make the future better." Those are real quotes from Bakul Jaja immediately after his abrupt change of heart. He doesn't even sound like the same person. Instead, he sounds like every other Dawntrail NPC, the one who repeats the same generically friendly and safe platitudes at every turn. We're expected to believe that he did evil things because he was desperate to prove himself. He says those children died so we could live. We had to succeed no matter what. To fail would mean it was all for nothing. And those are great motivations. But how do they correlate with his evil behavior up to this point? His concern for the innocent dead implies a compassion for life that contradicts what we know based on his actions on numerous occasions. When his friend needs a moment to rest, he says, "March or die." The friend pleads for mercy, saying, "Please, I sacrificed everything for the blessed siblings." If Bakul was really driven by extreme guilt over all the sacrifices made so he could live, wouldn't it bother him even a little to hear those words? His portrayal wasn't desperate to succeed so much as it was sociopathic comic book villain. So for such a dramatic change to be accepted by the player, we needed to see visible character development. I accept he could have a redemption arc. Although little of his internal struggle is shown on screen, you see him run away from Wuk screaming, and dead baby pots that you have no context for at that point. You could charitably make the case that being humbled in combat by Zeralja and then again by Wuk made him doubt himself as the almighty two-head. Seeing him get berated by his father even made me empathize with him. But there were countless critical steps skipped between Bakul Jaja doubting himself and then his sudden, unwavering support of and devotion to Wuk Lamat. Again, it felt rushed and unconvincing. But so many characters rushed into loving her that it felt like another one bites the dust, so to speak, almost like they were getting tempered.
Understanding with Mamuk? What sorcery did she use on them?
She held out her hand in friendship, elderly Bunewa.
Bakul Jaja is a fun character later on, but his development left something to be desired. He also never faces punishment for his crimes, which cheapens the impact of things like Valagarmanda's release in retrospect. The writers establish that anyone from each task could disqualify him on the spot if they so desire, but nothing ever comes from this. Maybe he'll do some community service in the patches. In some ways, I wonder if Bakul Jaja's backstory would have better suited Zeralja. If Bakul Jaja had, like, one jaw, been an obnoxious big brother who needs a reality check but doesn't do anything outrageously evil and ends up being your friend by the end. And Zeralja being the blessed siblings that countless babies were murdered to create, placing him under immensely crushing pressure to succeed. To me, that would make a lot more sense for Zeralja to go insane from that expectation and guilt, setting him on the dark path that led him to murder, genocide, and conquest. But Zeralja's villainy is later attributed to the burden of being the king's trueborn son. While many people accept this explanation, and it is far from the least believable motivation in Dawntrail, for me, it felt hard to swallow because of Bakul Jaja's portrayal as a kind and compassionate father who was deeply invested in his children's success. I felt puzzled by Zeralja and struggled to fathom his leap from overburdened trueborn son and genocidal patricidal maniac who abandons his own son in turn, claiming he was spurned by his father. Like, am I meant to believe this just because Galul Jaja didn't hand him the throne? He didn't seem spurned to me, having been treated with the same consideration as the other claimants. Also, it seems wildly irresponsible for Galul Jaja to let a child like this control the military, but that's a side issue. When we do meet Zoral Ja earlier in the plot, he says things that don't have much to do with his later character development. His bizarre philosophy that you need to teach the value of peace through war didn't make much sense. He calls the Garleans simpletons, but doesn't elaborate. Like, the line sounds badass on his own, but when you look at the full context of Garlemald and everything we as players have already experienced, this line being said and not elaborated on makes it read like an edgy 10-year-old made a new OC who's definitely cooler than the other big bad from the last story. Like, if I'm being honest, at no point did I feel I understood Zoral Ja. We just don't see much of his reasoning. I felt that there were some missed opportunities to develop Zoral Ja earlier on that could have led to more satisfying emotional payoffs in Alexandria and beyond. I did like the detail of a head of reason being missing during his trial, but again, I can't help but wonder, what if he'd been a two-head? And by the way, who's the mother of his child? No one asks. We spent so much time traveling with various beloved characters like the twins, and yet so little seemed to come out of it. Do you remember this interaction between the twins in Lido Loran and how one silly comment can reveal so much and be so memorable?
Another self-important little brat. Just what we need.
Reminds me of my childhood.
But in Dawntrail, I just didn't see much of their attitudes or personalities. There just wasn't a lot of humor or snarkiness. After Wuk and Bakul Jaja make up and she says, "You're not a complete alpaca's ass," and his heads say together, "Thanks, Wuk Lamat," Alice says, "Well, maybe it's for the best. Hatred is exhausting after all." And then Alphino, "Indeed, so let us make the most of our newfound friendship and bring together the people of Mamuk. We have much to discover." It's so dry. Like, this is not how these two behave at all. It just feels out of character. Even a little comment from Endwalker, like, "I can look after myself, you know." There's a fire and an edge, just a personality there that was missing. Trial has always been extremely witty and fun in conversation, with an endearing habit of poking fun at Alphino. She loved to challenge scholars who think that they're clever, hoping they'll rise to the challenge. And it would have been fun to see her do this to Kona, for example. And it isn't as though our companions didn't have substantive things to discuss throughout our long journey. Alphino's failure with the Crystal Braves is something that taught him many lessons he consistently used from that point onward, and he grew massively as a person and character because of it. He knows from hard experience that idealism and lofty ambitions aren't enough to succeed, yet he never offers any real insight or skepticism to Wuk Lamat when she exhibits naivety or ignorance. I often felt disconnected from characters I love, as they just weren't behaving like themselves. They weren't saying or doing anything offensive or anything wildly beyond the pale. It was just very bland, very safe, and worst of all, out of character. Many times it's just people listing off their respective tasks or who they'd pair up with in the next activity, so we all split off and then we repeat it again the next time. One Scion, however, who stayed in character and was a real joy every time he was on screen, who was definitely having his summer vacation, was Estinian. He was funny and charming, living this free-spirited life of an adventure that I so wished my character was having this expansion. As for me and my bunny girl, I never felt less free than I did in Dawntrail, being forced into choices and obligations that didn't feel natural to me at all. But not only that, feeling inept in moments where it didn't make sense for me to be there standing helplessly. Galul Jaja dying and Sphene doing her villain monologue. We know she's about to kill everyone and nobody tries anything. Yes, Emmett Selk did villain monologues, but they made sure every character couldn't just attack him. Like, after he shot the Exarch, he immediately said, "Don't attack me or your Exarch friend is dead." He held the Exarch hostage throughout that whole thing, so it made sense why nobody attacked him. Give a reason why characters can't do anything. Again, again, I do want to emphasize that I don't dislike the concept for Wuk Lamat, and I see her as another victim of the story's flaws rather than the cause of its shortcomings. She is overutilized and underdeveloped from a structural and literary standpoint. To see her in context of how she's integrated into the entire main story journey, she's far from the only character or element suffering from similar issues. It's not her fault. Like, it's not the fault of who she is that she or others have fallen flat. She doesn't deserve hate or vitriol, and I find a lot of the anger directed towards her to be really misguided, and I do hope that today's video can help people better understand and articulate the broader issues with the narrative and how they impact almost every aspect of it. Another thing I need to address here quickly is the music. Machinations needs to be stopped. It's time to let it go. This goes for many other overused tracks in the game. We have got to stop relying on the same handful of tracks over and over again for every little thing in cutscene. When I'm dreaming and I hear machinations, I know I'm having a nightmare. There was a moment I'll never forget where the Dawntrail theme music started to play, and I'm thinking, okay, something's cooking. All right, I'm getting excited. And then, without further delay then, all right, electric guitar, it's time to rock and roll, y'all. I'm ready for Master Chef Scion's edition. This is gonna be wild. What? No, 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 not.
It smells so good.
No way! No way! Why would they do this to me? I literally feel like I'm being trolled by the devs. I'm like, here we go. We got the Dawntrail theme song. We're about to cook. It's gonna be awesome. No, you. It's machinations. The other big topic for discussion with the music is Smile. I first want to say I have so much respect for Soken and the incredible music that this game has produced. I also enjoy the Solution 9 rendition of this song, but in cutscenes, and you probably know the ones, the song feels very out of place for the context it is in. The tone and style clash with the atmosphere was unlike anything I have seen before in this game. At first I thought it was just me, but from what I saw, a lot of people feel the same way I do about this. It's clearly a song that is supposed to play in moments where you're meant to feel happy or excited, where everyone and everything comes together, but when it plays, it just doesn't work, at least not for me. I also want to talk about some expectations that people had for the beach episode. Things this expansion story was marketed as ended up not being accurate, and I know this contributed to some of the mixed reception that it's gotten. First, being marketed as the best summer vacation ever. CGI trailer shows the Scions hanging out and chilling, having fun, being themselves. Thancred flirting with some girls, Stola studying a pillar, Urianger with pina colada. This made me think that the former Scions will get a chance to breathe and be themselves. Like, what do they do when they're just hanging out, not trying to save the world anymore? But unfortunately, all of these scenes appear in the ending credits for Dawntrail, and in the actual story itself, the Scions are sidelined at best, and at worst, cardboard cutouts of themselves. It was marketed as a rite of succession. Yes, that there would be drama between the Scions due to the competition and taking different sides. We clash with Thancred and Urianger briefly once in a dungeon, and then nothing else happens with this. So calling this drama is borderline misleading. About low stakes, you arrive in Tyrol to discover that one of the claimants would like to establish an ethno-state, while another has plans for world domination through conquest. Though my impression of the latter was, good luck in Ishgard, idiot. They might have some experience fighting reptiles, and they might not need your lesson about how bad war is, but I digress. Considering the competition early on, and of course the alien attacks from Alexandria, I wouldn't describe the story as low stakes at any point. I would, however, call it muddy stakes for reasons I've already gone into. There were unclear stakes that impacted the momentum and smaller sub-stories with lower stakes, but for those expecting a low stakes expansion, generally this wasn't it. With Graha saying, Since we averted the final days, it's been one existential threat after another, and now lives and all reflections hang in the balance. Now, there is one other thing that I want to mention, and it's something that is really deeply concerning me. It's about a pattern. Are they making an MSQ package? We know that they've made the dungeon package, which is 2 packs and a boss, 2 packs and a boss, 2 packs, a barrier, a boss. Are they trying to also make an MSQ package? Final area is filled with dead people. Final dungeon is you going through the memories of the main villain. The final dungeon is narrated by the main villain. The final dungeon is where the world is ending. The final area teaches you that nothing lasts forever and you need to let go and move on. The final area teaches you that there is hope. The final boss ends with them learning to appreciate and have faith in the heroes. How did this happen for the 3rd time? Technically 4 if you want to count 6.5's dungeon where you go into Golbez's memories. Is every expansion just going to try and replicate Amarat as a final area? Living Memory reuses the same general narrative structure of Ultima Thule, but this time, rather than saying goodbye to each scion as we move forward, we say goodbye to each simulacrum, Namika, Kryle's parents, and Kefkiwa. The villain seeking to save the lives, preserve their people through genocide. There are a lot of interesting philosophical and psychological questions having to do with their consuming souls, absorbing memory, storing memory, and erasing memory that were not explored in any way. I think I need to talk more about that in a video about the regulators because it's a whole other enchilada. In a lot of ways, it felt like a repeat of things that had already been covered without even attempting to cover the new, interesting narrative questions that could have been explored but weren't. In conclusion, I did not have high hopes for Dawntrail's story, and I tried to go in with an open mind. But I truly believe that the literary standard has fallen below what I would consider to be the bare minimum for a story-based game, especially FFXIV. Beyond boring, it has been often incoherent. Beyond filler, it has been often hollow. I did not expect so many existing characters to repeat the same corporate platitudes in a singular supportive voice that served the almighty purpose of uplifting Wuk Lamat and affirming her shallow ideology. If you can even call 2 words an ideology. I think the writers wanted to build a world that is happy, thinking that it would make for a lighthearted expansion, but without grounding things in reality, or at least consistency, within the established rules and personalities of the setting. I struggle to go along for the ride. Logic makes a believable world, and simplistic solutions undermine its credibility. Complex issues like war, slavery, and the burden of leadership have been handled with subtlety and nuance in this game in the past. We've had whole expansions dedicated to these themes and what can go wrong when idealism doesn't account for the world's cold reality. Recall how Emmerich almost got murdered for his noble intentions to make peace with Dragonkind, Yatsuyu's conclusion that she was beyond redemption, and how Nanamo was nearly assassinated for attempting to reform Ul'dah for the better. For those who might feel I've been too critical of this story, I'm only judging it by the high bar that's been set. I enjoyed the parts I could very much and savored the good times as much as possible, so the least I can do is be honest with you, and I do wish I could have had more fun with it. Maybe next time, in the story patches maybe, I'll resonate better with the story. Story is the reason I got into FFXIV. I have a creative writing degree. I almost went into a career path of being a research assistant at the English Lit department at my university. Story is what hooked me, and it's why I stayed in FF14. I was so impressed with the quality of the writing for an MMO when up to that point my main game had been World of Warcraft. I have, of course, enjoyed the gameplay. Bunny Boys, I've enjoyed more, but the story has always been number one for me, and my enthusiasm for the story is what's bled over into my love of other kinds of content. There is much, much more that I could say, but I think this video might be 2 hours long, at least 1.5 hours, so I think I want to wrap things up here, but I've said almost everything that I want to say about this story. I can only try to hope that the future story patches will improve. Why don't you let me know how you felt about the Dawntrail main story quest in the comment section down below. And if you enjoyed hearing my thoughts in this video, please consider supporting the channel on Patreon or on Twitch. I'll have you know that I have started a new World of Warcraft channel where I'm uploading content regularly for our times enjoying World of Warcraft. If you want to join me over on Zepla's WoW Realm, we also have guilds running that are popping off for EU and NA. I want to thank my Patreon and Ko-Fi subscribers for helping keep the channels afloat. I also want to thank my Omega Buns who subscribe at the highest tier. That's Jeanette B, Chris, and Pete Wilson. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.